3. All right. Hi, everyone. My name's Andrea Fitzpatrick of The Wise Life. And this is a feature of the Mamas podcast, which will be found under the umbrella of The Wise Life. And today it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Mr. Phil Anderton. We have him on Mamas today as our special guest, and he has a podcast of his own, which we'll want to introduce. Becoming a Dangerous Man, I believe is the title of that. Is that right, Phil?
Yes,
and
it is.
Part of what you do in your professional life, in your day job, if you will, is that you help men figure out how to get in the fight, how to become dangerous. Now, I'm curious, just kind of as our leaping off point, how you define that. What is that for you?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Andrea, and thank you for that introduction. So the distinction here, the easier way to describe what dangerous is to describe the opposite, right? So I like to when I question men and I first get to meet men, we talk about being a danger, right? And the difference there is when I am not prepared, when I am not mentally, emotionally, spiritually grounded, stable, it's easier for me to fly off the handle. It's easier for me to road rage. It's easier for me to put my children, my family in a position where I am not actually their protector, right? A lot of men claim to be a protector, and a lot of men claim that, well, I provide and I'll protect and I'll die, you know. And I like to educate men that as a combat vet, as somebody who's trained in the martial arts and done fitness my whole life, I can tell you there's been some humbling moments where none of that's going to matter. None of that's going to matter. You know, a lot of this started for me in the summer of 2020 when I was a little too close. We weren't in the riots, but we were a little too close. And it was very humbling as this rough and tough man, this military man, to realize if I missed the marks, if I missed the situational awareness, if I missed the opportunity to see what was going on around me, and I put my family in this position, I'm a danger to my family, right? If I road rage and somebody shoots a gun, as we've seen in California, where, you know, road rage incident leads to guy pulling up, shooting in the car, kills the kid, right? Bullet hits the kid in the stomach because the parents were road raging. I'm a danger. My ego, my mentality is not there, right? So long answer is men who don't understand what it means, who don't have a plan, who aren't confident to a point of, right? They say the man who doesn't fight because he knows he'll win, right? There's confidence in that. And there's also a calmness to that. Absolutely. So being dangerous is about confidence, capability, and being prepared. It's about balance. It's about the emotional intelligence. It's about a lot of things that honestly are just calmer. And I'm almost 40 now. I couldn't have done this in my 20s. So as an older man looking back, I can tell you being dangerous is so much easier in one sense, but I'm putting all the work in on the front end. I'm preparing for, I'm training for, I'm mentally understanding my enemy, I'm paying attention, and then I'm training my family as well, if that makes sense.
I'll resist the humor. And I have 10 brothers. I have this as humor. So I like, yeah, exactly. So I love what you're saying there. And part of what I'm hearing in what you are saying is that when to you, becoming dangerous really means how do you step forward into that leadership role with your family where, you know, you're in essence, that saying that you see flying around, I think on LinkedIn and other places on social media. It's better to be a gardener or be how do you put that?
Warrior tending a garden.
Yes, thank you.
A gardener at war.
Right. This is what I hear you saying. This is exactly what I hear you saying, which is about being prepared, both mentally and emotionally, but also physically. This is what I hear you saying, that men aren't. And I'm curious, is it just your experience, you know, in 2020 with the riots getting too close? Is it just that's kind of motivated you? Or is there like a cultural thing?
Not at all. No, I would say it's looking back over a 17-year marriage and realizing that for the first 10 years, I was a shitty husband. For the first 10 years, I was a man-child. For the first 10 years, I was a boy. We won't go into my childhood, but I grew up with a single mom who worked a lot. I ran the streets of Houston. I gained a lot of street smarts, independence, but I did not gain an education in masculinity and manhood and what it means to be a man. I didn't learn that till I was 32, and we'll just say I almost lost my family. I made enough dumbass decisions that led to a point at 32 where I almost lost my family. And I'll say I had all those grass is greener on the other side ideas. I had shitty dudes that had 3 divorces that I was, drinking beers with and thinking like, oh, getting advice from guys who had no business giving advice. And long story short of it is at 32, when I almost lost it all, I would argue for me, that's when I became a man. That's when I said, wait a second, what am I about to lose? Why do I feel this way all of a sudden? I thought this is what I wanted. And I realized everything that I was meant for was right in front of me. And I gained a laser-like focus on them. And the trajectory since 7, 8 years later, the trajectory since is profound. It's profound that in another 10 years that I'm going to be raising grandkids and I'm going to be looking back and so thankful that I am where I am. And part of the passion that drives me, aside from the tactical protector, like the tough guy role that I like to play on the weekends, right, with my kids and truly understanding how to keep them safe, is also the legacy building piece as a man. And so many men growing up right now, so many men are going to miss out on that because they're going to fall for, we'll just call it the OnlyFans hookup, body count, porn, just the trash culture combined with the attack on families, combined with the attack on, separating kids from parents who don't agree with this crazy stuff going on right now. All that kind of leads me to where we are, because I know how fortunate I am to be here and to have a woman who, I don't want to say trained me, right? For don't get wrapped too much in my words on what I say or how I say it, right? But a woman who helped educate me, and then through trial and error, I realized where we are now. And both, she'll say the same thing, how fortunate we both are to have not given up through those growing pains, right? Through those struggles. And our kids are so we're so blessed, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually balanced. They're healthy, they're happy. They're not on any medications. They play sports. They have a lot of friends. And a part of that we attribute to our success as adults, to not allow our personal stuff and what we went through. It didn't impact them, right? We were able to kind of grow without collateral damage, if you will. So we're very fortunate there. And if I can go back to your leadership, I just wanted to say the thing I find, and this word's important, men who I find need the most work are the men who have the most success at work, because they think that's enough. They think that's enough. They think the paycheck, they think their wins at work attribute. And I'll tell you, I was a senior enlisted in the military. My kids, I had a lot of accolades at work. Guess who didn't give a shit? My kids. They wanted dad. They didn't want the senior chief. They didn't want the job title. They didn't want the eval or the awards that I was getting. They wanted dad. And when dad didn't show up, that hurts them, right? That impacts them. So a lot of men that I find are successful leaders at work are usually so tired or exhausted. And maybe this is something that women who work, and my wife certainly experiences, because I work from home. My wife comes home every day. If I could share a quick story without derailing us, she sat on the couch when she got home yesterday. I had made dinner, I had cleaned, and she sat down, and I said, wow, this must be what it feels like when a dude sits his ass on the couch and grabs a beer after, the wife's been home all day preparing, homemaking, if you will. And the guy doesn't even say, hi, hello, how you doing? How was your day? Like, is this what it feels like? And it's kind of, and we're making a joke about it, but she works 9 to 5. She comes home tired. So the man who works 9 to 5, I get it. You're coming home tired, but guess what? Your wife, your kids, they don't care about your meetings. They don't care how your Zoom call went. They want to know if you want to see what craft they made at what arts and crafts they made. My daughter would play Mancala 100 times a day, every day. And we make time for that because that's what she cares about. She don't care what the hell I did at work.
Yep. It's different. And I think you're hitting up on a lot of really important key points there. So much to talk about, but I think I want to keep us focused. There's so much you're luring me here.
I warned you. I warned you.
You did. You totally did. That's great, though. That's wonderful. We'll just say, hey, come back. So going to the kids and the crafts and the things like that, showing up as a papa, a father in the leadership role when you have the work role. Like I'm hearing you share something that maybe some people don't think about, right? Because especially on maybe a podcast like mine, which is, again, I'm working to be a little bit of a disruptive but supportive voice here, meaning mamas allied make America strong, but it's like papas too. Papas allied protect all of us. And it's this dual thing. I heard you describe this, and you didn't describe it in the way I'm going to, but you talked about the relationship between you and your wife and what you've built for your kids over the years, and how you didn't let the past and these other things creep in. And then I hear you talking about, well, my wife comes home. She's the one that works this 9 to 5 job, and I work from home. So it's kind of like almost this role reversal. And the point I'm wanting to make as the person hosting this podcast is for people's like, it's what works for you and your family, right?
Oh, 100%. I mean,
whatever that role or that education choice is.
Yes.
Right? It's what works healthily for you and your family. And this point that Phil just made so beautifully by sharing about his daughters, like our kids, it matters to them that we're happy and that we're fulfilled and that we're able to be present for them and whatever it is the thing that they want to share with us. When we're not able to do that, we have giant impact on them in the negative, right?
Oh, 100%. My daughter and I have the relationship we have because I'm able to take a breath when I need to, and I'm able to be present with her. And a big shift for my daughter and I, a big shift was, I don't know what book or podcast or audiobook said this, but it's like, reframe. Stop saying you're making me angry and say, I'm choosing to lose my temper. I'm choosing to be upset right now. I'm choosing, and I will tell you, for your mamas out there, and I'm not claiming who's worse at this. Usually men are worse at the anger and losing their shit. Usually women have more patience than men. But I will tell you, if your husband doesn't do this yet, game changer in our house was when I stopped blaming my 5-year-old, my 6-year-old, my 7-year-old, when I stopped saying, you're doing this and you're making me this, and game changer when you own it. Right. And this goes into so many other things that you got to own, like owning the protection from point A to B. And we can leave the tactics aside, because I want to focus probably in the home with the kids and kind of maybe my perspective. But certainly that's a huge reframing opportunity if you haven't figured that one out yet for your listeners.
I think absolutely. And I'll second it with another thing I use with my kids a lot is because one of my daughters learned from someone at school before I pulled them from school to homeschool them, this idea of, you're making me feel whatever it is. You're making me angry. You're making me this or that. I said, no, honey, we choose. Okay, no feeling is wrong. No feeling is wrong, but what we do or do not do about the feeling can be. And so now, like when they're not abiding by a set of, like, say, household rules that are primarily for their safety, right? Rather than like yelling and whatever, I'm like, what consequence would you like to choose? Which thing would you like to lose? So they get the freedom to choose which thing out of a small number of things I'll choose for them, but it also makes them kind of step up and own that. And I'll tell you, I've had more success with that kind of approach where I'm acknowledging their feelings, but still holding that responsibility there for them than I have before, when I just like remind them and I write these lists and all these different things, right? Because I had to do some of what I've implicitly heard you say, where in which I had to reframe how I did parenting, because I didn't want to parent the way I was parented, if that makes sense.
It does. And I would just like to use this opportunity
Please.
A lot of people talk about spanking, and we need to spank, and we need to spank. And I was spanked. I was spanked. But what you just described, and what I am now doing, and I will say I spanked my daughter. We haven't spanked in years, but I did.
Yeah.
I mean, don't get me wrong. There are instances where sometimes it just needs to be a quick correction, right? A quick correction. And maybe there's not really a teaching moment. But what you just described is a teaching moment. What you just described is investment in your child and their education outside of whatever the hell's going on in public schools. But so I would just, a lot of people, they went from spanking, which really didn't teach anything, to not spanking, which isn't teaching anything. And we need to get back to the middle where you and I are.
I totally agree with that. And I like the way you just placed that so beautifully right in the middle, because that is what it is being able to, what I call it is like we build a frame, right? We want to give them tons of choice in that frame. So we don't want them to ever feel coerced if we can possibly avoid it. And obviously, sometimes if a child is in danger, it's our job. We have to step into that leadership role and correct it. It's like my boy when he was really little and he didn't understand running in the street and getting run over. That's not a teaching moment. That's I take action, get you out of the street moment.
Yeah.
You beautifully place that the total inaction to overreaction, right? When we come
overreaction with no lesson. Yeah.
Right. There's no lesson. And there's a ton of research behind what you just said, actually, that in the short term, it may scare your child, but in the long term, it doesn't actually create long-term skill sets or change. So the more we can get them to think and shorten the gap, like we call it the gap in neurological terms. So when we can get them to recognize how they're responding, whether they're responding or reacting, and what they're getting from it. I've got 3 different personalities in my household with my children, and they're all very, very different. And one of them is very, very spirited, and she's a handful, and sometimes what happens is I wind up inadvertently laughing at her because I have this little teensy tiny pint size just going ballistic, right? And then she gets upset with me because I'm laughing. But it's like, I'll just say to her, you're so like your mom, because I can remember. And so then I go, okay, honey, I know you're not getting what you want, but are you still getting what you want? Doing that, stomping and yelling and all that jazz? No. I said, well, how do you think you can get what you want? And I'll tell you, when we're able to interact with our kids like that, it changes how they respond to us. They may get mad, they may stomp around, but if you hold that line, they'll come back to you and they'll want the hug. They'll want the reassurance. They'll want the lesson in whatever it is. And I'm like, there's so many things I want to ask you. Like, I feel like not just femininity is under attack, but masculinity is under attack. And part of what I hear you saying and what you do with men is like, that's part of what you help them regain. But there's this beautiful balance between how those go together. And it's different for every individual, I think, and every family. But there's this beautiful balance. So I wanted to talk about this just for a moment and then give you the mic back. But one of the things I heard you talk about in your example where you shared how you and your wife grew your family is you made that masculinity and femininity and growth work for you. And part of what I consider my bias coming in here, part of what I consider the women's leadership role in our society is we hold safe spaces for our men. And when we do that, our men can then hold the spaces safe for us in a different way. Does that make sense? Meaning we hold the mental, emotional, when we do it right, we hold the mental, emotional space safe for our men. And when we do that, they can protect us and they can totally lean into their masculinity and we can totally lean into our leadership. Does that make sense the way I'm saying that?
It does. I may say it a little differently, but it does. Yeah. So a couple things. And my wife is a Southern Latina from LA, so maybe she's just built a little different. But I don't know that I could unload emotionally on her. I'm not saying I couldn't if I needed to. I guess I would say my better option, my first choice, is a man in my life I trust that respects my wife and my family that I could unload and be vulnerable with. That would be my first choice. And here's why. My wife needs to trust my leadership. And I'm not saying we can't be flawed. I have my flaws. My wife knows me better than anybody. My first choice would be, and this is what I work with men on. Men are becoming more open, I found, because I lead an online masculinity group. They're more open sharing online, but every man in the group I always ask, do you have somebody within 15 minutes you can grab coffee and have the same conversation? 9 out of 10 times they say no.
Yep.
They're using the social online and I try to sell it to them that this is a resource to build confidence, to show that men will not judge, that there are men out there who won't judge you, that you can be vulnerable with, but you need to do this in person. You need to grab coffee. You need to go to the shooting range or the golf course. You need to be able to do this, because the problem is when they go to the golf course, what is it mostly? Stereotypically, it's locker room talk, at least prior to marriage and kids. Even then, you can have locker room talk. It's immature, it's uneducated, it's not serving the family, it's not serving the man on the path, right? So I prefer to have an in-person real talk. My neighbor and I, we stand on the kids' bus stops down the street. Myself and my neighbor, we go out and we wait and we watch them get on the bus. And then for 20 minutes every single morning, we conversate in the driveway about whatever's going on. Sometimes those conversations are deep. What an opportunity for me to offer advice or guidance to my neighbor, my friend, about shit that's going on. Like opportunities like that have to happen in person. And to your other point, I want to go back to the masculine, feminine. This is where we are winning. I don't associate masculine, feminine with dishes and laundry. So let's get something straight. I do my own laundry. Guess what? I'm still a man. Like nobody's questioning my masculinity. My son and I wash the dishes in this house.
Right.
We all take turns making dinner. I am a clean freak. I am a minimalist clean freak. Before I got on this call with you, I just vacuumed my whole house. Okay. Anybody that wants to come question my manhood, I live in Dallas, Texas. Bring it. And let's forget this stupid idea that chores dictate or cleanliness dictates. My wife goes to work. I stay home and I help men on Zoom calls. I podcast. That doesn't my wife doesn't come home feeling more masculine than me. Okay.
Right.
Masculinity is in me using this 200-pound frame that God gave me, my 20-year combat military experience, and I lead. I call it, and maybe not all your guests or your listeners will like this. I am the CEO. My wife is the COO. That's how we run our house. And it works for 17 years and 3 kids. My wife handles day-to-day. My wife handles operations. My wife tells me where to go, where to be, what she needs me to do. My wife tells me if there's returns that need to happen. But guess what? When we moved to Dallas, Texas, we thought a lot about it. There was probably some prayers. But at the end of the day, I said, hey, we're going to go. And it benefited her, but I made the decision. I made the decision to get out of the military. She supported it. We talked about it. We game planned together. We talked to family. We spent a year processing, but at the end of the day, I made the decision because as the leader of my family, with her full support, I'm expected to take us to tomorrow. So while she leads today and I don't get in the way, but my wife runs finances. My neighbor, he runs finances because his wife's terrible with money. Again, all these trivial things do not dictate man or woman. Okay, right. In my opinion, as a leader, I'm expected to make sure we're ready for tomorrow. And and she trusts my judgment. She trusts my risk assessment. She trusts that I've put all of her and the kids' best interest into that decision. And then I, as the husband, support her today. What do we got? Where do you need me? How can I support you? How can I make your life easier? Because she is the glue that holds this family together. She's the reason we have soccer practice all over fucking Dallas and games and tournaments and birthday parties. And she's the one. If you've been in operations, she's operations. I'm vision and future, and damn sure better believe the protector. But again, that's more. Again, I'm 200 pounds. She's 130 pounds. Who's more likely to step up to the bad guy? Me. It's just what it is. I am the one capable. I am the one carrying. I am the one ready to rock. And she will take the kids and she will find the nearest exit, and hopefully we'll catch up.
And to me, that you're describing a family dynamic, and also for our listeners, you're going to hear all sorts of opinions on the Mama's podcast. But the big real takeaway that I'm wanting you to understand from today's podcast and any before and after really is that we are advocating for men and women's voices. We are advocating for mamas and papas and family-centric choices, healthy 100%. Parenting, healthy papas and mamas to guide this nation forward, and our families, starting with us and our families first. This is really what Mamas is all about. How do we help our children have the education they need in today's world? And that's kind of my next question for you. Feels like, how do you how do you do that as a dad? Because like you've mentioned to me, you know, in prior conversations, some of the complications with that. I'm hearing many wonderful things from you, but like, how do you make that happen for your family?
So this is what I say. We played our hand, and or we dealt our hand financially in our 20s. We probably could have done better. But we, in our 20s, we trusted the public school system. We have a 23-year-old, so we trusted the public school system, and we just accepted that as a military family. We hadn't considered it until more recently. So I try to meet people where they are, and I know you have to do the same thing, because there's no cookie cutter, right? So what I would say is, for people like me, I'm 39. I still have a few bills, and I have a 23, 16, 11. We chose what we could. We controlled what we could. We did a ton of research in Dallas, Texas, and we found what we believe to be the best school system, hands down, for public school. And then I interviewed for a job to be a school marshal, which got me, I didn't really want the job, but it got me to meet all the school marshals. It got me a tour of the whole, I learned this school has state-of-the-art facilities, state-of-the-art money is spent on securing our kids. So I was very confident there. I met the superintendent. I've met the teachers. I've been able to volunteer at the school multiple times. We go to the PTA, PTO events. We attend high school football games, right? So I would say on the one spectrum is me, who, right, wrong, or indifferent, and I'm not actually condoning this, and I'll get to that. My vote is homeschool, hybrid homeschool. But for those who are where we are, you have two choices: make your situation better or find a new situation. We have always picked the best we could, and we've always been involved with our school. I would say, if at some point, and oh, by the way, I just volunteered at the school for a day with the Watchdog program. Guess what I did? I spent 45 minutes in the library looking for books with rainbows. They didn't have any. I had my little list on my phone. I knew, because of Daily Wire or whoever I follow, you know, some email had like 10 books to look out for. Guess what I did? I went to my kid's school and I looked for those 10 books and I couldn't find them. I know, mind blown, right? Get involved in your goddamn school. The second thing I would say, if I started to see something I didn't like, I'm going to put a suit and tie on, and I'm going to go run for whatever position I need to upend and make sure that the vote goes back the other way. I'm going to be involved in my kids' school. The second part I would tell you is education happens in the home, right? That I don't know what we call that anymore. Instruction. I don't know what we call that. If it's a facilitation, if it's a waste of their time. Education happens in the home. My 16-year-old son is a junior in high school. He said, "Dad, what hemisphere are we in?" I said, "Are you fucking kidding me, guy? Are you kidding me right now? What hemisphere are we in?" Now, mind you, I asked 20-something-year-olds that work with my wife. They didn't know either. So all bets are off on baseline education, what that means anymore. But for some reason, I remember the axis, and I remember prime meridian and equator. He knew none of this.
Wow,
he knew none of this, right? Education happens in the home. So something else I like to do, Memorial Day, I do a Wikipedia refresh. We go over a couple reasons why we do Memorial Day, where it started, 1868, whatever it was, Laying of the Flowers. I'm probably butchering it, but, you know, Pearl Harbor, 9/11, Veterans Day, what it means. Education happens in the home. So 1, improve your kid's situation or change it. 2, education happens in the home. 3, raise our young people to not be reliant on a system, right? That's what I'm doing as a father. I'm trying to detach as much from the system as I can. And I'm raising my kid, I'm raising my son and daughters to not need the system. Okay. And, you know, for those who are, but not need it. Hey, if the public school system here stays the same, by all means, if you both want to work and you need to work, or marry somebody who understands, hey, maybe that's not for me. Maybe I wouldn't mind staying home. Maybe I want to raise a family in Homestead. Maybe I want a couple acres, right? I want to educate my children that there are other possibilities. And so that would be the three ways I would approach that.
That's beautifully put. And one of the things I'm going to just emphasize here for our listeners is that I hear you say engagement, 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 engagement. In other words, high contact with the school, with the people who are with your kids, with the environment that your children are in. And if it isn't suitable, then you're there showing up, figuring out how to make that environment safer and better and more equitable for your children. Now,
your tax dollars pay for it, make it work for you, or leave.
Exactly. The other thing I don't hear you saying, which I appreciate immensely, is that you're taking personal responsibility and encouraging it. And nowhere in there are you saying that our children are completely buffered from everything, right? That doesn't build us strong. That doesn't build resilience. But we do want them to have a safer, healthier childhood, right? We don't want them hurt. We don't want them hurt by our school systems. And I hear you implicitly saying all those things by how you're involved in your daughter's school, right? How you're showing up. And you're right in the point that education happens in the home, because I think how we talk about and think about learning and education shapes how our children perceive it and approach it. My children are endlessly curious. I thought it was very, very cute. I think it was in the last week, something like that. I introduced multiplication cards to my 7 and 8-year-olds, and didn't really like. I try to stay away from labels and stuff with my unschool, because I literally unschooled and tried to step away from a lot of the pedagogy because I saw it harming my kids. So I've flipped the script on them and reinforced over and over and over again that learning is fun. It's not hard. We do have to practice some things, and that when you mess up, you don't receive a punishment. It just means you didn't understand something, and then you need some help. Period. Nothing bad. Because they when they came out, they were expecting a lot of bad. Their self-esteem was pretty low, and it was really cute because in the evening before bed, I send them upstairs to get ready and do all the bedtime things and to read. So they usually read. My daughter comes halfway back down the stairs and she says, "Mom, can we play that game?" And I'm like, "What game, babe?" She's, that card game. I said, "Honey, I don't remember a card game." And I'm thinking like a deck of cards for like Old Maid, Goldfish War, something like that. She's, that card game with the big cards with the numbers on it. And I said, "Oh,
The flashcards,
yeah, the flashcards." And I said, "Yeah, absolutely, babe." She goes, "Yay!" She went billing back up the stairs. And when I came up there, all 3 of them were camped out on one of them's bed.
Wow.
And they were testing each other with these multiplication cards. And they were like competing with each other who could get, and if they won, if they got it right, they got to get another card. They would made up their own rules. And I just thought, that is so cool that like my kids are doing this. Like I didn't leave that one. I gave them all the materials, but I didn't leave that one. And so my point with our listeners is like what Phil's presenting, what I'm presenting is like there's no one way. There's what we're advocating is healthy ways forward for mamas and papas. And I know we're coming up on time here, pretty close, I bet. Yeah. So one of the things I want to ask you, Phil, before we get off today is like what would you recommend, or what takeaways would you like to send out for like mamas and papas in today's world, like how to advocate for their children and children's education themselves, even like, I mean, that's part of the impetus for this podcast in the first place is I have started running into so many parents who feel like they're swimming upstream, in a kind of crazy world. And I'm like, gosh, parents' voices really need to be validated. How do we strengthen that?
So a couple things that I think translate to women and men. It starts with you. It starts in the home. It starts with you. It starts in the home. And then I would say, and this is where I coach, right? Don't wait to get punched in the mouth to realize you were unprepared, right? So if it starts with you as a mom and a dad, are there areas for your relationship? If you're a single mom, are there things, are there things preventing you from being in a relationship? We have a very close friend of ours. She's got 2 boys. I'm their uncle, and I mentored. She actually flew out here, stayed with us, and I was able to spend some time with the boys. Are you putting your kids in position to be around a strong male role model that you trust? And then I would say for men and women, are you working on your relationship? Happy wife, happy life is bullshit. My wife will tell you that the first 10 years of our marriage, I was, like I said, selfish man child, all this stuff. When I started actually serving her, I got more out of it. I was more mentally and emotionally prepared to show up. I was more, I cut a lot of toxic shit out of my life. Like it was a giant net positive for me to actually work on myself. And she benefited from that because now instead of always wondering on eggshells if her husband's going to leave her because every fight I just wanted to quit, right? Men shelter in place. Men are quitters. Probably a whole nother topic. But I would just quit. I'd be like, I don't want to deal with this. I'm out. And so she's always on eggshells. I work on myself. I invest in myself. I grow myself. Now I'm like, holy shit, I would not want to be anywhere else but in a partnership, a relationship, a business, a legacy building opportunity with my family. Big holistic picture now, big bird's eye view. Where else would I want to be? Guess what? Now she doesn't have to be on fucking eggshells anymore. Now she can be emotionally stable. Now she can be more herself and not worry about tiptoeing around my childish emotions because I'm ego driven and I'm seeking validation and no more Mr. Nice Guy, right? I'm going through all that. And then I would say, here's the biggest mistake. Parents wait till their school crumbles and then they're scrambling. You said it earlier and I didn't interrupt, but you said something, and this is my entire practice. I think you said responding versus reacting. And I love that because responding means I had a plan. Reacting means I'm trying to put a fire out. And so to your parents, to your mamas, I would say, work on yourself. Don't try to please your husband if he doesn't, work on yourself. Let him work on him. The secondhand effect, you should be able to build your relationship, lead your family. I am mindful that as a man, I am who my daughter is going to accept as acceptable, my behavior, and my son is going to try to emulate. And then I would say, if you're waiting for your school to fall to have a backup plan, if you're waiting to think of other options, if you're reacting as a parent, you're not leading your family. Okay. You need to have a plan in place. You need to be looking for little triggers, have little checkpoints, little breadcrumbs to see, okay, all right, we're still good. We're good for another year, another 6 months. And you said it, you said responding versus reacting. And it's the same thing I teach men, reacting versus being prepared. I have a plan when I leave this house. Should I encounter a bad guy? It's 17 rounds if necessary. I also have a med kit if somebody else, because he's not going to need that, right? He's not going to need a med kit, but somebody else might. And so I'm prepared for that. Okay. I would challenge your mamas, eliminate as many single points of failure that force you to be a firefighter, and be the planner that you are, be the operations officer that you are, and have a plan.
And to our papas, because that's your specialty.
To our papas, I would say, get your fucking egos in check, man. my failure, even when I make mistakes yesterday, it's normally my ego and taking things personal. How does an 11-year-old trigger me to the point of needing to yell at her? And my wife will always tell me, if any other man raised his voice at her, what would you do?
Boom.
I mean, it's no question. Boom. His head would come off. His head would come off. So why the fuck do I get to do it? Because I still battle my ego. I still battle that man child. I still battle all the things that those men are battling. But the fact that I'm aware and I can be comfortable enough to tell you and your listeners that I'm dealing with it means I'm better than a lot of these guys who can't have that conversation, who haven't accepted it, who haven't looked in the mirror and been comfortable with the man. I'm comfortable looking at myself on a camera. I know my flaws. I know where I have work to do, but I'm working on it. And I'm open with it because it reminds me every day to work to be better.
Mm-hmm. I like what you're saying, and I think it comes down to what a friend of mine coined Andrea's awe factor, and I kind of laughed when he said that, but it's like AWW, awareness, willingness, and want. It all comes down to those three. When we have the awareness, the willingness, and the want to make a change, to be different, to be responsible, and show up, right? And I'm going to say, first, just thank you so much for coming on the Mama's podcast. I hope you'll come back again. Obviously, there's a lot we can talk about.
Yeah. And we could have a series.
Yes. Well, and secondarily, I want to just big kudos, because I know that papas have as big of a challenge as mamas of getting real in front of a camera and sharing with people about their mess ups, right? And all of us, for some reason, men and women, seem to think that, oh God, we got to ace this, we got to put on this perfect face, whatever. And I've started saying to people, do not judge your outsides, your insides by somebody else's outside. Social media is just that. It's social media. It's not real life. We all have our challenges. We all mess up. The real question is how do you step into that? How do you show up and deal with that? How do you get authentic and real and help others and help your family? How do you shift and grow, right? And I hear you saying that, like with the example that you shared about your daughter, you're like, oh, and your wife had this very on point question for you. And,
Very.
and that, I ask that same question to myself, when I get certain ways with my kids sometimes and I get challenged, I'm like, oh, that's a trigger. Cause I have this little philosophy for myself where it's like, if I have an emotional trigger, what do I need to look at in myself? There's something I haven't healed yet, right? I always say for my warrior program, it's not for the faint of heart, because I'm asking everybody to really step up in the same way that I hear you talking about with what you do. So,
and can I share one thing with your
Please.
mamas real quick?
Please.
So I have this mirror at my desk for all my coaching calls. And the reason why is you just said something that I want to allude to. I used to say window mirror, looking out the window, but I here's an idea, run with this, please make it better. The Sleeping Beauty movie, I think it was Sleeping Beauty or whatever, the mirror on the wall.
Yeah,
mirror on the wall.
Snow
White, right? mirror on the wall. To me, the problem with women, and more so women, but also men, social media, hear me out, is that mirror. It'll tell you whatever the fuck you want to hear, because people who don't actually know you will react and comment and like and share, and they'll build up this bullshit persona that ain't you. It's not you. The person, that's why I asked men, I said, when you look at this guy, are you comfortable having a conversation with him and allowing him to judge you, implying that deep, dark shit's going to come out and he's going to call you on whatever bullshit you got going on that you're spitting? That on LinkedIn, I have 3,000 followers on LinkedIn. They're fans, they're cheerleaders. They're not real. I appreciate them. I respect them. I've met great people. But I am naive to think that they matter compared to my daughter, my son, and my wife, who I live in the house with, or if they even come close to mattering to this guy. Right?
I like what you're saying there, and you're absolutely right. You're talking about the heart and core of connection and relationship, right? And when we don't make those real and we don't show up for those, when we're not present for those, we forfeit them. Now, people say to me, what's your goal? What's your goal in life? I said, honestly, for me, it's to live a life of no regrets. I don't want to get to whatever age I get. You're younger than me, by the way. So I laughed when you talk about getting old. I'm not old.
I got the grace.
Yeah, I'm not old. Yeah, you got the grace. I got the crow's feet. I say, well, they're character lines. To live a life of no regrets really means that same thing you're talking about, becoming dangerous, only in the feminine sense for me, what that, how I define that for me. It's being able to look at my life and not feel like, when I look in that mirror you're talking about, how do I feel about that woman? Would I confide in that woman? Would I trust that woman? Those are really powerful questions you're asking. And I want to thank you for bringing that on to the mamas today for our listeners. And just thank you for coming today. I really appreciate it. And before we close, where can people find you? Do you yet have a web address? Like, where can we find you?
I do. And I just want to say to any woman out there who's on her own, I'm always going to make the case that my wife is more dangerous than you. I don't care what you do. I don't care what your job title, your LinkedIn profile. I don't care how much money you have. My wife's more dangerous than you because she's made more dangerous by dealing with me every single day. Okay. Women and men are meant to do this together. Individually, that is not how we were designed. So I just want to say my wife is more dangerous than any woman out there climbing a corporate ladder on her own. And with that, thank you so much. I feel like we could have talked on 16 topics. And I warned you about me being able to go off on a tangent. So I appreciate you so much. You kept me linear as you could. I have a podcast, Becoming a Dangerous Man. It is my way to just talk into a microphone. It's an evolution. I have 73 episodes, so it's a lot of opinionated. It's nothing. I enjoy it. It's a passion, like you said. It's the podcast, a passion. And then I'm building out my website. It's just my name, philanderton.com, and that's really just for those who don't have LinkedIn. I'm most active on LinkedIn. I'd encourage anybody that wants to follow me there.
Do you have a mailing list yet? I'm sorry if I missed that.
I use Substack. Substack for my newsletter. You can find that on the website or my LinkedIn as well.
Okay, beautiful. Well, thank you so much for being on today, and I'm just really looking forward to speaking with you again. I hope our listeners got a lot from it. I sure did.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I hope they did too. I think we're very aligned, and we're it's nice to see two different people who maybe say some things differently, and maybe we don't agree on everything, but it's clear we care about the individual and the family, and their ability to provide, to love, to nurture, to build, to grow, all the things that we do align on, even if we would do a few things differently. So I'm happy to be here and to do this again if you'd let me.
I will be delighted to. And you hit the heart of it. It's not really about being carbon copies. It is about being aligned and having each other's back in this big old world, really.
Yes, 100%.
All right. Well, with that, folks, thank you so much for this time, and we'll look forward to next time.